Jessica, you're marrying a liar. Get out while you can. I flinched, almost dropping the engagement ring I'd been admiring. I turned to see Laura leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, and an infuriating smirk on her face. Don't make a scene, Laura. What are you talking about? I tried to keep my voice calm, but it quivered slightly. She stepped closer, her eyes fixed on mine. You think you know Mark? He's been playing you. He's not who you think he is. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the table. It was Mark, texting me he'd be late again. It was the third time this week. I sighed, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. See? Always an excuse, Laura said, her tone mocking. My gaze hardened. Whatever issues you have with Mark, leave me out of it. We're happy, and nothing you say will change that. Laura shrugged nonchalantly. Suit yourself, just don't say I didn't warn you. She walked out, leaving a storm of doubts in her wake. Later that evening, Mark finally came home. His tie was loosened, and he looked tired. I met him at the door. Rough day? I asked, placing a hand on his chest. Yeah, the usual, he replied, kissing my forehead distractedly before heading to the kitchen. I followed him, watching as he poured himself a glass of water. Laura said something weird today. He arched an eyebrow, sipping his drink. What about? She said you're lying to me, that I should get out while I can. Mark's expression darkened before he laughed it off. Laura loves drama. You know that. She's probably just bored. Bored enough to make serious accusations about us? He put down his glass, stepping closer. Jess, you know how she is. Don't let her get into your head. You and me were solid, right? I wanted to believe him. I really did. So I nodded, trying to push Laura's words from my mind. Yeah, we're solid. The next day, I was at the cafe planning the wedding details, going over florists and caterers, when Laura showed up again. This time, she was with Mark. They were laughing about something, standing too close for comfort. Hey, I called out, trying to hide my irritation. Mark and Laura turned to me, Mark grinning and Laura with that same smirk as yesterday. Jess, there you are, Mark said, walking over to give me a quick kiss. Laura and I just ran into each other. Thought I'd say hi. Right? I said, forcing a smile. Well, I need to talk to Mark about some wedding stuff. Laura sat across from me, clearly not leaving. I'm sure Mark has a moment. Let's hear it. It was hard to focus with her there, her eyes watching every move I made. Every time I glanced up, she was smirking or whispering something to Mark. Later, back at home, I felt the tension building inside me. Mark, can we talk? Sure, what's up? He replied, sitting on the couch. Can you tell Laura to back off a bit? She's becoming a bit intrusive, he sighed, rubbing his face. Jessica, she's my friend. You know that. She's excited about the wedding, too. Still, there's a limit. She doesn't need to be there every time we're together. Mark looked at me, exasperated. I'll talk to her, okay? But don't blow this out of proportion. I bit my lip, feeling dismissed. Fine, I muttered, heading to bed. As I lay there, doubts crept back in. Laura's words, her presence, and Mark's dismissive attitude weighed heavily on me. I wanted to trust him. I needed to trust him. But something felt off. Am I just imagining things? I whispered into the darkness, the silence offering no answers. I woke up the next morning to find Mark already gone, leaving just a note. Big meeting today. See you tonight. Love, Mark. I frowned, feeling the distance growing between us. I needed answers, but instead of confronting, I decided to observe. I was knee-deep in wedding preparations. The florist was showing me arrangements when Laura swanned into the shop like she owned the place. Jessica, you look busy, she said with a fake smile. Just a bit, I replied curtly, not in the mood for her antics. That's why I'm here. Thought you could use some help. She drifted toward the flowers, picking one up and twirling it. This is fun, isn't it? Sure, Laura, I said, trying to focus on the florist. Oh, come on, she interrupted. Planning a wedding must be stressful. Tell me, what's next? Cakes? Dresses? I shot her a stern look. We're managing fine, Laura. But she wasn't backing down. Every decision was questioned, every choice criticized. By the end of the appointment, I was exhausted. I'm just saying, maybe you should let Mark decide a few things. He's good at this, Laura said, winking. Thanks for the help, but I think we've got it under control, I answered, keeping my frustration in check. Later that evening, Mark came home late again. I was waiting in the kitchen, tapping my fingers on the table. You're late again, I said as he walked in. Work's been crazy, he replied, loosening his tie. Yeah, I can tell. Laura's been a great help, I said sarcastically. Mark sighed, clearly tired. I know she can be a bit much, but she means well. I stared at him, trying to read his expression. She's more involved than I am at this point. We're just friends, Jessica, he said, sounding annoyed. Friends don't act like that, Mark. This is our wedding, not hers. My voice was rising now, the doubts and frustrations bubbling over. Calm down, Jessica. You're overreacting. I have every right to react, Mark. She's everywhere we go, making decisions and undermining me. I could feel the tears of anger welling up. He ran a hand through his hair. I'll talk to her, okay? Just let it go for now. I wanted to scream, to make him see what was happening, but instead, I nodded, too drained to continue arguing. The next day, I met my mom for lunch. She could always tell when something was wrong. What's going on, sweetie? She asked, her eyes full of concern. It's Mark and Laura. She's always around, and I feel like there's something off, I admitted, my voice cracking. Honey, sometimes you have to trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. She squeezed my hand. Have you confronted him? I've tried, but he brushes it off. I don't know what to do. Stay strong, Jessica. You deserve honesty. Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself. My mom's words were firm, giving me a bit of the strength I needed. That night, I decided to stay up and see where Mark was going. He'd been vague about his whereabouts, and I needed to know. Around midnight, my patience paid off. Mark's phone buzzed. It was a message from Laura. Be there in 10. My heart pounded as I watched him leave. I followed at a safe distance, trying to keep calm. He stopped at a quiet street, and there she was, waiting by her car. They hugged, too warmly for just friends. I quietly snapped photos, my hands shaking. As I returned home, fury and hurt swirled within me. This wasn't over. Laura's manipulation had gone too far, and Mark's betrayal was clear. I wasn't backing down. It was time to get what was rightfully mine. Morning sun streamed through the curtains, but its warmth did little to soothe the cold knot of anxiety in my stomach. I met my mom for breakfast, still reeling from the previous night's discovery. Honey, you look like you've seen a ghost, she said, her voice edging with worry. I found them, Mom, Mark and Laura, together, I said, showing her the photos I had taken. Her face darkened. Jessica, this is serious. You need to confront him. I will, but now's not the right time, I responded, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I need a plan. She nodded, understanding. Whatever you need, I'm here. Back home, I was setting the table when the doorbell rang. It was Mark, his usual charm dialed up. Hey, beautiful. He tried to kiss me, but I turned away. We need to talk, Mark. I put the photos on the table, his eyes widened in surprise. What are these? He demanded, but his voice lacked the usual confidence. You tell me, I challenged, folding my arms. It's not what it looks like, he started, but I cut him off. Save it. I just want the truth. My voice was steady, a contrast to the storm raging inside me. He sighed, shoulders sagging. Laura's been having problems. I've been trying to help her, that's all. There's nothing going on. If that's all, why didn't you tell me? I countered, my anger flaring. I didn't want you to worry, he said, trying to reach for my hand. I pulled away, staring at the man I thought I knew. Mark, you promised me honesty. This isn't it. Before he could respond, his phone rang, Laura's name flashing on the screen. He silenced it, but it was too late. My suspicions were confirmed. Answer her, I said coldly. Tell her she's not welcome here anymore. He looked panicked, but nodded, dialing her back and putting the call on speaker. Hey, Laura, he said, voice strained. Mark, what's happening? She whined. Did she see the pictures? Yes, Laura, I did, I said sharply, stepping closer. This charade ends now. The line went silent for a moment before she hung up. I turned to Mark, feeling a strange mix of relief and despair. We need boundaries. No more, Laura. You need to choose, Mark. Me or her. I choose you, Jessica. Always, he said, desperation in his eyes. I'll handle it. He left to meet Laura, and I finally exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. An hour later, he returned. She's out of our lives, he said, but I wasn't convinced. Later that night, as I sat in the living room, Mark's phone buzzed again. Another message from Laura. This isn't over. I knew then that I couldn't just rely on Mark's words. This was my fight, too. That night I called Megan, my best friend. Megan, I need your help. Anything, Jess. What's going on? It's Mark and Laura, I explained the situation. Damn, Jess, we need a plan, she replied, always ready for action. Yes, I said, feeling a spark of determination. We're going to expose them, both of them. And so with Megan and my mother by my side, I began planning the ultimate revelation. This wedding would not go as planned. It would be a day of truth, justice, and most of all, karma. As the wedding day drew closer, the tension was almost unbearable. But I tried to keep my composure. Mark seemed oblivious, acting like everything was fine between us. Laura was noticeably absent, but I knew better than to lower my guard. One evening, just before dinner, my mom pulled me aside. "Jessica, have you made any more progress?" I nodded, showing her the folder I had put together. The evidence was all there. "We'll expose them at the wedding. Megan's agreed to help." Mom looked relieved. "Good. They need to face the consequences." That night, Mark called me into the living room. He was holding his phone, looking troubled. "Jessica, I got a strange message from Laura. She wants to meet." "Don't go, Mark. She's trying to manipulate you again," I said firmly. He nodded, but I saw the hesitation in his eyes. "You're right. I won't." It was the reassurance I needed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that things had to come to a head soon. 2 days before the wedding, Megan came over with a projector, a laptop, and a determined look on her face. "We're set. Everything's ready to go." "Thank you, Megan," I said, hugging her. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "We've got your back, Jess. Mark and Laura won't see this coming," Megan assured me. The night before the wedding, I paced in my room, phone in hand. It buzzed with a new message. From Laura. "Meet me at the park now." Without thinking, I grabbed my coat and headed out. I needed to hear whatever she had to say for herself. At the park, Laura was waiting by the fountain, her face half hidden by the shadows. "You came," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Say what you need to say, Laura," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You think you're so clever, don't you? You and Mark playing house while I'm left in the cold," she spat. "This is your fault, Laura. You brought this on yourself," I shot back. "Maybe so, but I'm not going down alone," she said, a sinister smile creeping across her face. "I've got my own plans for the wedding." My heart raced. "What are you talking about?" "Just wait and see," she purred, turning on her heel and walking away, leaving me in a whirl of anger and fear. The next day, I shared Laura's threat with Megan and my mom. "We need to be prepared for anything," I said. "We will be," Megan reassured me. "Let's stick to our plan." Finally, it was the day of the wedding. Guests filled the venue, chatting and laughing, oblivious to the storm brewing. I stood in my dress, feeling like a warrior preparing for battle. The ceremony began, and as Mark and I stood at the altar, I felt Megan's reassuring presence behind me. Just as the officiant began his speech, I nodded to Megan. She hit play. The projector lit up, displaying the incriminating photos and texts between Mark and Laura. Gasps filled the room as the truth spilled onto the screen. "This is what you've really been up to, Mark," I said, voice trembling with emotion. Mark turned pale. "Jessica, I can explain." "There's no need, Mark. It's all right here for everyone to see," I said, my anger giving way to a heavy sense of relief. Laura, who had been hiding at the back, tried to slip out unnoticed, but Megan blocked her path. "Not so fast, Laura. Time to face the music." The room erupted in murmurs and outrage. Family and friends turned their backs on Mark and Laura, their support for me clear. Mark looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Jessica, I'm sorry. Please, just give me a chance to explain." "It's over, Mark. I deserve better than this," I said, walking away, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. As I left the venue, my mom and Megan flanking me, I knew this was just the beginning of my journey to healing. The truth was out, and justice had been served. Now it was time to move on. After the explosive revelation at the wedding, I felt a mixture of fury and vindication. As my mother and Megan guided me out of the venue, I knew this was far from over. Mark and Laura had to face the consequences. The following day, I sat in my living room with Megan, going over the next steps. "Jessica, are you sure about this? This plan can backfire," Megan said, looking worried. "We have to be thorough, Megan. They need to feel the consequences of their actions," I replied, steady and determined. My mom joined us with coffee. "What's the plan?" "We've gathered all the evidence. Now we need to put everything together and present it to Mark and Laura's circles," I explained. Megan nodded in agreement. "We'll make sure they won't escape this, professionally and socially." We divided tasks. Megan would handle Laura's workplace and social circles. My mom and I would focus on Mark's colleagues and friends. The next morning, I sent an email to Mark's associates with attached evidence of his betrayal. I knew it could jeopardize his career, but he deserved it. Megan was equally ruthless, sending a detailed dossier to Laura's boss. We waited for the fallout. Just before noon, my phone rang. It was Megan, breathless with excitement. "Jessica, you won't believe this. Laura's been called into a meeting with her boss. She's toast." Relief washed over me. "We did it, Megan. This is only the beginning." Hours later, Mark stormed into my house, anger radiating off him. "What did you do, Jess?" "Exposed you for what you are," I said coldly, standing my ground. "You've destroyed my career. How could you?" he yelled, pacing the room. "You destroyed our relationship, Mark. Actions have consequences," I retorted. While we argued, Megan texted me updates. Laura had been suspended, pending further investigation. "What do you expect to gain from this?" "Revenge won't fix anything," Mark said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I expect you to face the same humiliation you inflicted on me," I replied. With a final glare, Mark stormed out. I slumped onto the couch, exhausted but feeling some sense of justice. Days turned into weeks. News of Mark's unethical behavior spread, causing him to spiral further. His colleagues distanced themselves, and his professional reputation took a nosedive. For Laura, things weren't any better. She was ultimately fired, her manipulative nature revealed to all. She became socially isolated as her friends and acquaintances shunned her. During this period, I focused on healing. My mom and Megan were my pillars of support. One evening, while having dinner with them, I reflected on everything that had happened. "I never imagined things would go this way," I admitted. "Sometimes karma has a way of working itself out," my mom said wisely. Megan raised her glass. "To new beginnings and justice served." "To new beginnings," I echoed, feeling a sense of release. Months later, I was in a much better place. I had started a new job, found peace in small routines, and surrounded myself with genuine people. The scars were still there, but they didn't define me anymore. As I sat in my garden, sipping tea and looking at the sunset, I realized that revenge wasn't the most satisfying part. It was reclaiming my life and finding strength I didn't know I had. The betrayal of Mark and the manipulation of Laura had shaken me to my core, but I emerged stronger, resilient, and ready to start anew. The wedding day was meant to be perfect. Instead, it became unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. As Megan hit play, and the truth spilled out for everyone to see, the reaction was instantaneous. People gasped, and whispers filled the room. Mark's face turned white, then red with fury. Laura tried to disappear into the crowd, but Megan's glare kept her rooted in place. "Jess, this is out of control," Mark said, trying to reach for my hand. I pulled away, staring at him. "No, Mark, what was out of control was your betrayal." "This is justice," I responded, my voice firm. Laura stepped forward, eyes blazing. "You think this makes you better, Jessica?" "You're pathetic." I turned to face her, feeling the sting of her words but standing tall. "You are the one who's pathetic, Laura. You and Mark deserve each other." Friends and family began to rally around me. My mother stood at my side, her face calm but resolute. "Get out," she said to Mark and Laura. "Neither of you are welcome here anymore." Mark looked to the crowd for support but found only cold eyes. Laura sneered, trying to salvage her pride. "I always knew you were a vindictive witch, Jessica," she spat. "Enjoy your victory." "Oh, I will," I shot back. As they walked out, the room fell into a stunned silence. Megan took the mic, thus clearing her throat. "Thank you all for coming. This event is now over." One by one, guests came up to me, offering words of support and apology for not seeing the signs earlier. As the last drunk uncle staggered out, Megan whispered to me, "You did it, Jess. It's over." "Not quite, but it's a start," I replied, feeling a small sense of relief. Back at my mom's house, she poured me a glass of wine. "I'm proud of you, Jessica. You stood up for yourself." "Thanks, Mom, but it still hurts," I admitted. "Healing takes time, but you're on the right path," she reassured me, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. That night, I lay in bed, letting the events of the day wash over me. Mark and Laura were out of my life, but the scars remained. I knew the road to recovery would be long. The next morning, Megan called. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better, but we did the right thing. By the way, any news on them?" "Oh, Laura's in shambles. Lost her job and her so-called friends. As for Mark, he's facing professional exile. No one wants to be associated with a liar," she said, satisfaction dripping from her words. Well, karma's working faster than I thought, I replied, unable to hide my relief. Over the next few weeks, Mark tried to contact me multiple times, but I blocked every attempt. I was done with him. Laura didn't dare to reach out, knowing any interaction would only make things worse for her. One afternoon, while I was having lunch with Megan, she leaned in. "You've started dating again?" I blushed. "A little. Met someone online. Nothing serious, but he's nice." "Good for you, Jess. You deserve all the happiness." "I'm taking it slow. Still healing," I said, smiling softly. Fast forward to a month later, and I was at a cafe, meeting my gentleman friend Ethan for a casual lunch. He knew bits of my past, but I kept it light. "So how was your week?" he asked, genuinely interested. "It was good. Busy, but good," I replied, feeling the warmth of his gaze. Ethan grinned. "Well, here's to great beginnings and better days ahead." As we clinked glasses, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. My journey was far from over, but I was moving forward, one step at a time. Revenge had its place, but now it was time for renewal and growth. My shattered vows had led me to newfound strength, ready for whatever life had in store next. The fallout from the wedding debacle continued to ripple through our lives. Mark and Laura were now pariahs in our social circles. The sense of vindication was satisfying, but it didn't completely erase the pain. One evening, as I was unpacking some boxes in my new apartment, a fresh start I desperately needed, my phone buzzed. Megan's name flashed on the screen. "Jess, have you heard? Mark and Laura are apparently trying to set the record straight," she said, a mix of shock and amusement in her voice. "What now?" I asked, exasperated but intrigued. "They've scheduled a press conference to clear the air, or so they claim." I sighed. Desperate times, I guess. What are they planning to say? "Who knows, but whatever it is, it's not going to change what they did," Megan replied. "True," I said, shaking my head. "Well, let's see how this goes." The next day, the press conference was all over social media. I watched a live stream from the comfort of my home. Mark and Laura stood at the podium, looking disheveled and cornered. Mark cleared his throat, glancing nervously at Laura. "We are here to apologize and explain our actions. What we did was wrong, and we are deeply sorry for the hurt we caused." Laura stepped forward, her eyes cold. "Yes, we made mistakes, but the way Jessica handled things was extreme." I could almost hear Megan scoffing from across town. "What a joke," I muttered to myself. Mark tried to regain control. "We've learned from this experience, and we hope to move forward, asking for forgiveness from those we've wronged." I turned off the stream, feeling a mix of disgust and relief. If they thought a public apology would fix everything, they were sorely mistaken. 2 days later, I was at a local cafe with Megan when someone approached our table. It was Laura. I stiffened, ready for another confrontation, but she looked different, defeated almost. "Jessica, can we talk?" she asked meekly. Megan bristled. "You've got some nerve showing up here, Laura." "It's okay, Megan," I said, taking a deep breath. Turning to Laura, I asked, "What do you want?" I wanted to say, "I'm sorry, genuinely sorry for everything." Her voice was shaky, and for the first time I saw a crack in her armor. "I lost my job, my friends. It's been hell." "Well, actions have consequences," I replied coolly. "I know, and I deserve it. But you should know Mark's been struggling too. He can't find work, and his family's cut him off. This has hurt everyone," she said, a tear sliding down her cheek. "This is not my problem, Laura," I responded, feeling no pity. "You're right. I just needed to face you. To admit what I did," she said, turning to leave. "Goodbye, Jessica." Megan watched her go. "Do you believe her? Does it matter?" I asked. Their apology doesn't change what they did. As days turned into weeks, I received updates from mutual friends. Mark had been shunned in his professional world, and Laura was struggling to rebuild her life. Their attempts to mitigate damage had failed. Public sympathy was scarce. One afternoon, my mom surprised me with a visit. "I brought cake. Let's celebrate your fresh start," she said, beaming. "Suits me," I said, setting the table. Over dessert, my mom asked, "Have you heard from Mark?" "A couple of emails, all ignored," I replied. "Good. Moving on is the best revenge," she said wisely. The final piece of closure came when I received a letter from Mark. I almost didn't read it, but curiosity won. "Jessica, I'm deeply sorry. I've lost nearly everything, but writing this gives me some peace. I hope you find happiness. You deserve it. Mark." I folded the letter, setting it aside. It was too late for apologies, but knowing he recognized his faults brought some closure. As I stood on my balcony that evening, watching the city lights twinkle, I felt a sense of calm. The storm had passed, and it was time to embrace the future, free from lies and betrayal. I was ready to step into the unknown, stronger and more resilient than ever. Months had passed since the chaos of the wedding. Life had started to settle into a new normal. I focused on my work, my friends, and rebuilding myself from the ground up. The process was long and painful, but I emerged stronger. One Saturday morning, Megan and I were at our favorite coffee shop, sipping lattes and chatting about our week when my phone buzzed with a news alert. I glanced at it and felt my stomach drop. Mark Davis, former executive, files for bankruptcy amid professional isolation, read the headline. Megan noticed my reaction. "What's up?" "Mark is filing for bankruptcy," I said, showing her the news. "Good," she commented. "He deserves every bit of it." I nodded but didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. Instead, I felt a strange sense of finality washing over me. As we walked out, Megan turned to me. "So what's next for you, Jess? New job prospects?" "Actually, yes, I've had a few interviews. Hoping something comes through soon," I replied. "You'll crush it. You always do," she said, giving me a side hug. That afternoon, I decided to take a stroll through the park where everything with Laura had come to a head. It felt therapeutic to walk through the place that once held so much tension and now meant nothing more than a patch of green and blue sky. While sitting on a bench contemplating my journey, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Ethan. "Dinner tonight? My treat," it read. I smiled to myself. "Sure, 7 p.m. at the usual spot?" I replied. As I got ready that evening, my mom called. "Jessica, I saw the news about Mark. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom. It feels like I can finally move on," I reassured her. "I'm proud of you. Just remember, you've come a long way, and I'm always here for you," she said. "Thanks, Mom. I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart. Have fun tonight." At dinner, Ethan was his usual charming self, asking about my day and genuinely interested in my answers. It felt refreshing to talk to someone who had no connection to my past turmoil. "Have you thought about taking a vacation?" Ethan asked halfway through the meal. "You know, that sounds like a great idea. A bit of a break from everything," I admitted. "We could plan a trip together," he suggested, making my heart flutter. "Maybe we could," I said, smiling. At the end of the night, as Ethan walked me to my door, he paused. "Jessica, I really enjoy spending time with you." "I feel the same," I replied, a warmth spreading through me. "Good night, then," he said, leaning in for a gentle kiss. "Good night," I echoed, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. As I closed the door, I realized how far I had come. The pain and betrayal that once defined my life were starting to fade into the background, replaced by new experiences and genuine connections. The next morning, I sat in my living room, looking out at the city. My phone buzzed with another notification, but this time it was an email about a job offer I had been hoping for. "You've got this," I said to myself, taking a deep breath. With that, I accepted the offer, feeling ready to embrace this new chapter. My journey was far from over, but each step was a testament to my resilience and strength. The road ahead was unknown, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced betrayal, fought for justice, and emerged victorious. Now, it was time to build a future on my terms. With my mom, Megan, and Ethan by my side, I was ready for whatever life had in store next. As I stepped out onto my balcony, the morning sun bathing me in its warmth, I felt a profound sense of peace. The past was behind me, and the future was bright, and I was ready. The incessant pounding at the door jolted me awake. I glanced at the clock. 11:37 p.m. Fear crept in as I clutched my robe, tiptoeing down the stairs. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Grandma, it's us! Please open up!" Two small voices pierced through the howling wind and pelting rain. I swung the door open to find my grandsons, Alex and Caleb, drenched and shivering on my doorstep. Caleb clung to a crumpled piece of paper in his tiny fist. "Boys? What on earth?" My words caught in my throat as I ushered them inside, wrapping them in thick towels. "Mom, she left us at the park," Alex said between chattering teeth. "She told us to come here." Caleb shakily held up the note. "Read it, Grandma." My hands trembled as I smoothed out the soggy paper. 5 scrawled words made my heart plummet. "Take them to Grandma's house." Jenna's looping cursive mocked me from the page. How could she abandon her own children like this? "I'm so sorry, boys," I whispered, pulling them into a fierce embrace. Caleb's little body shook with sobs. "You're safe now. I've got you." I marched them upstairs, bundling them into warm pajamas. Haunted eyes followed my every move as they huddled on the guest bed. "Will Mom come back for us?" Caleb asked, his voice tiny and fragile. I froze, unsure how to respond. After everything she'd put them through, would Jenna really want them back? Swallowing hard, I gently brushed Caleb's damp curls from his forehead. "We'll figure this out tomorrow. Tonight, you just need to rest." Alex remained stoic, clenching his jaw to mask the fear flickering in his eyes. At 10 years old, he tried so hard to be the brave one. As I settled into the armchair beside their bed, their shuddering breaths slowed into the peaceful rhythm of sleep. Yet haunting questions whirled in my mind, dark memories stirring. My relationship with Jenna had been fraught from the beginning. The sweet, loving girl my son Derek fell for vanished after their wedding, replaced by someone manipulative and cold-hearted. Still, she was their mother. What desperation could drive a parent to abandon their own flesh and blood? A gnawing suspicion took root. This was about more than just bad parenting. Staring at my grandson's sleeping forms, their cheeks still glistening with drying tears, a fierce protectiveness burned within me. I would get to the bottom of Jenna's deceit, whatever it took. For now they were home, they were safe, and I would do everything in my power to ensure it stayed that way. As the first pale rays peeked through the curtains, I allowed my eyes to drift shut, steeling myself for the maelstrom ahead. The shrill trill of the phone jolted me awake at the crack of dawn. I immediately tensed, scanning the bed. Relief washed over me as I saw Alex and Caleb huddled together, still slumbering peacefully. "Hello?" I whispered, padding out of the room. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Sheriff Davis. We received a troubling report last night from a family at Oak Ridge Park." My stomach twisted into knots as the sheriff proceeded to recount how a hysterical Jenna had shown up in the middle of the night, rambling about voices telling her to hurt the boys. She'd fled before the cops arrived, leaving Alex and Caleb alone on a rain-soaked park bench. "We've been searching all night, but there's no sign of her." His gruff voice softened. "I know you two had your differences, but are the boys safe with you?" Squeezing my eyes shut, I managed a tight nod before realizing he couldn't see me. Yes, they're here, safe and sound." After ending the call, my hands trembled as I glimpsed the shredded remnants of my tranquil, retired life around me. How could Jenna put her own sons through such trauma? I hurried back to the bedroom, my heart clenching at the sight of them cuddled together like orphaned kittens. Jenna's depraved actions were utterly unforgivable, but what terrified me most was the possibility of far deeper depravities lurking beneath the surface. Voices telling her to hurt them, or her own twisted thoughts whirling out of control. Over the next few days, I discreetly made inquiries around town, desperate for any clues that could shed light on the dark path Jenna had ventured down. What I uncovered made my blood run cold. "She's lost her mind, plain and simple," Derek's old friend Mitch grimly told me one afternoon while I had the boys occupied playing in the backyard. "Got mixed up with some real nasty people, from what I gathered." My heart pounded as Mitch detailed rumors of shady business deals, illicit money trails, and unsettling new acquaintances in Jenna's life. "They're saying she did things, illegal things, to keep the cash flowing after Derek." He shook his grizzled head sadly. After Derek's death in that horrific car crash 6 months ago, Jenna had rapidly changed, staying out at all hours, dressing in ostentatious new clothes, and lavishly showering the boys with toys and gifts she couldn't afford on a widow's pension. The picture grew exponentially uglier the more I unearthed. Theft, embezzlement, fraud. No depravity seemed off-limits in Jenna's warped quest for wealth and status. And at the center of this web of lies and immorality were my beloved grandsons, forced to fend for themselves as collateral damage while their own mother indulged her demons. One night after the boys were tucked in, I stood at the bay window, staring out at the inky darkness. "I will burn it all down to ashes if I have to," I murmured in a voice that chilled even me. "She won't go unpunished for this, not on my watch." The wheels were in motion to expose the full extent of Jenna's deception. I could only pray I wasn't too late to protect Alex and Caleb from the worst of the fallout. The rusty hinges of the attic door protested as I pulled it down, thick dust motes swirling in the beam of my flashlight. I couldn't recall the last time I'd ventured up here. After Derek's passing, any reminders were too agonizing. But to have a prayer of protecting Alex and Caleb from Jenna's toxicity, I needed to understand how we'd arrived at this catastrophic juncture. So I steeled myself and climbed the creaky ladder. Coughing through the musty air, I aimed my light across a maze of boxes and trunks packed with decades of memories. My gaze snagged on a crooked stack of faded photo albums. With a lump in my throat, I sank onto the dusty floor, pulling them into my lap one by one. Smiling faces of happier times beamed back at me. An 8-year-old Derek, freckles dancing across his nose as he grinned at the camera on his Little League baseball team's picture day. High school graduation, his lanky frame dwarfing that ridiculous maroon cap and gown. Our tight-knit trio on my front porch after he'd moved into his first college dorm room, already looking so grown up. My chest ached as I drank in every moment, unable to fathom how that sweet, vibrant boy had become the haggard, haunted man who ultimately couldn't outrun his demons. Then the photos shifted. Derek's energetic smile remained, but his arm was slung around a pretty blonde girl with an equally megawatt grin. Jenna. I'll never forget the day he arrived home from university on Christmas break, hands trembling with poorly disguised excitement as he introduced us to his new girlfriend. How her dimpled cheeks and sparkling eyes instantly camouflaged the punkish, asymmetrical haircut and bare midriff that made me inwardly cringe. She's the one, Mom. Derek had whispered to me in the kitchen that night as she dazzled my husband with some anecdote about hitchhiking through Amsterdam one summer. I know it seems crazy since we've only been dating for a few months, but she's my soulmate. Part of me wanted to bundle him back into his Star Wars sheets from childhood and never let him go. But I couldn't ignore the sheer incandescence radiating from my typically brooding son. So I smiled and welcomed Jenna into our family with open arms. How I lived to regret that decision. The subsequent albums told a heartbreaking tale, one of increasing loneliness on Derek's face as the wattage on Jenna's dimmed through their wedding portraits and into the first couple years of their marriage. Finally, I flipped to the last few pages and recoiled. Here were my grandsons, capturing in wide grins and crinkled nose giggles. But the woman beside them was utterly unrecognizable. Cold, hollow eyes bored into the camera. Painted smiles slashed across her taut face with all the authenticity of a circus clown. Where had my sweet, goofy Jenna gone? The one who taught me how to twerk at their engagement party? The girl who threatened to burn her eyebrows off while helping me make adorable, succulent pumpkin centerpieces for their fall wedding? Slapping the album shut, I shuddered as the revelations washed over me. Jenna's betrayal of Derek ran even deeper than I could have imagined. She'd sucked the very light and joy from his spirit long before his tragic demise last year. I swiped at the heated tears streaking my cheeks as a grim calm settled over me. Whatever drove Jenna to her current depths of immorality, her own children would not be her next victims. Not if I had any say in the matter. This is ridiculous. You can't keep my children from me. Jenna's shrill voice sliced through the diner's murmured chatter like fingernails on a chalkboard. I stiffened as she stormed up to our booth, eyes wild and knuckles blanched from clutching her purse strap. Alex and Caleb instantly shrank back against the cracked vinyl seat. Caleb whimpered, and I instinctively tugged them closer under the safety of my arms. Don't you dare upset them further, I warned in a low tone. The boys are terrified of you, Jenna, and after what you pulled, can you blame them? Her lips curled into an ugly sneer. Oh, so you've turned them against their own mother? That's rich, coming from the woman who poisoned Derek against me for years. I opened my mouth to retort, but she cut me off with a harsh laugh. Save your breath, Lorraine. I want full custody, effective immediately. If you don't hand them over willingly, I'll take you to court and make you regret the day you ever met me. Shaking her head slowly, she leveled me with a chilling glare. Mark my words, you won't be able to protect them forever. With that ominous vow hanging in the air, she spun on her spiked heel and stormed out, leaving us all shaken. I clutched the boys tighter, feeling their tiny bodies trembling against mine. They shouldn't have to endure this trauma. not from the person who was supposed to nurture and safeguard them. When we returned home, Sheriff Davis was waiting on the front porch, hands shoved in his pockets. "We finally got to the bottom of what Jenna's been up to," he said grimly, "and it's not good." My heart plummeted as he recounted a twisted web of fraud, theft, and money laundering, all stemming from Jenna's efforts to siphon funds from Derek's life insurance payout after his death. "She set up shell companies, forged documents, you name it," the sheriff said, shaking his grizzled head. "From what we can gather, her crazy behavior was all an act. A way to get the boys out of her hair so she could pull off this whole scam undetected." White-hot fury blazed through me at the thought of her using our sweet grandsons as disposable pawns in her greed-fueled games. I wanted to scream, to hurl plates at the wall, to unleash the pure, primal rage burning in my veins. But I couldn't. Not with those two sets of fearful eyes, watching my every move, clinging to me as their solitary beacon of stability. So I inhaled a slow, steadying breath. Whatever Jenna's motivations, she's proven herself an unfit parent who's put them in danger. I want full legal custody. Relief flickered across the sheriff's face. "I'll make sure our case against her is airtight. You just focus on taking care of those boys." He started toward his cruiser, then paused. "And Lorraine, if she tries anything else, you let me know immediately. You hear?" I offered a terse nod, then scooped Alex and Caleb into my arms, their small bodies melting into my embrace like they'd never let go. Jenna could hurl whatever malicious threats she desired. I didn't care about her con artist scheming or her vile machinations to line her pockets with my son's hard-earned money. All I cared about were these two precious souls who had already witnessed and endured far too much in their young lives. They were my entire world now. And if Jenna delusionally thought I'd relinquish them without a brutal fight to the death, she was soon to be rudely awakened. "So you're really going to fight me on this?" Jenna's derisive laugh crackled through the phone line. "You senile old bat. I'll bury you." I clutched the receiver tighter, struggling against the flood of rage testing my restraint. "If you think I'll let you within a mile of those boys after what you've done, you're delirious. We'll see about that." The smug venom in her tone made my skin crawl. "My lawyer is prepping an ironclad case as we speak. You might have been able to manipulate the local cops, but I'd like to see you talk your way out of this in an actual courtroom." The line went dead with an ominous click. I slowly returned the phone to its cradle, steadying my ragged breaths. I'd expected Jenna's threats, expected the nasty accusations and diversionary tactics in a desperate attempt to regain control of her twisted game. But her arrogance made one fatal miscalculation. She had severely underestimated the resolve of a lifelong educator pushed to her limits. As the morning light filtered through the curtains, I studied the two tow-headed figures sprawled across the guest bed in a jumble of sheets and gangly limbs. Bruises and scrapes mottled their arms, remnants of being abandoned in the park like unwanted pound puppies. But their cherubic faces were finally relaxed in peaceful slumber, no longer etched with fear and uncertainty. In that moment, I vowed to do whatever was required to preserve this newfound serenity they so desperately craved, which meant playing Jenna's macabre game and beating her at it without hesitation. I strode into the study and booted up my laptop, fingers flying across the keys as I toggled between search engine results for top private investigators near me and local family law attorneys with stellar custody case track records. Time was of the essence if I wanted to mount an unshakable offensive before Jenna beat me to the courtroom battlefield. 2 phone calls and a hurried conference later, and I'd assembled an elite cadre of legal warriors ready to dismantle whatever vitriolic crusade Jenna tried to wage. "We're going to rip her facade to shreds from every angle," Annalise, the razor-sharp family law specialist, assured me over steaming mugs of coffee. "Money trails, witness statements, a full forensic analysis of her involvement in your son's death. She won't know what hit her." The other woman, Mei Ling, was one of the area's most sought-after private eyes, having cracked countless high-stakes cases with her enigmatic brand of perception and grit. Her obsidian eyes glinted with determination. "I already have leads indicating Jenna's scam goes far deeper than just fraud. We're talking organized crime rings, money laundering operations spanning multiple states. There's a good chance she had Derek killed to inherit those insurance funds. A collective chill reverberated around the table. I slowly lifted my gaze, feeling their scrutiny. I don't care what stones need to be upturned or what vermin you need to smoke out, I stated with flinty resolve. That thing is not going to terrorize my grandsons any longer. I want her exposed for the vile, heartless snake she is, and I want those boys to feel safe again. Mei Ling and Annalise exchanged weighted looks before giving terse nods of understanding. We knew the battle lines had been drawn, and all bets were officially off. Jenna wanted to sick her high-priced legal team on me? Let her wage her war. Little did she know I relished the chance to go nuclear if pushed. And I hadn't survived 5 decades as an inner-city educator by playing nice with bullies. The tension in the cramped courthouse conference room was thicker than New England clam chowder. I could barely meet the clouded gazes of the disheveled strangers flanking my sides, members of the jury still reeling from the bombshell revelations. Jenna attempted a sickly sweet smile as she rose from the table, emaciated frame swimming in her designer pantsuit, but the wanton arrogance that usually dripped from her had been extinguished, replaced by the skittish panic of a rat in a trap. I kept my own expression steeled and impassive, fighting against the savage curl of satisfaction in my gut. We weren't quite at checkmate yet. Let's be reasonable here, she began in that saccharine lilt that used to grate my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. I never meant for things to go this far. You all have to believe I only wanted what was best for my children. Mei Ling made a derisive noise beside me, thumbing through the damning evidence portfolio. Photos of money trails and encrypted communications between Jenna and a notorious cartel kingpin. Ballistics reports tying the revolver used to kill Derek to one of the mobster's henchmen. A chilling CCTV clip capturing Jenna's vehicle leaving the scene of the accident, moments after Derek's truck plunged over the ravine. Is that so? Mei Ling arched one sculpted eyebrow. Because these financial ledgers suggest you spent over $2 million on designer handbags, high-stakes gambling jaunts to Monaco, and a literal palace in the Dominican Republic, all from the insurance payout after murdering your own husband. Jenna's mask faltered, replacing the sugary syrup with a hiss of venom. You self-righteous vultures wouldn't understand. I was trapped in a loveless marriage, taken for granted at every turn. I deserved those things. You deserve to leave your children orphaned and broke? I growled, unable to contain myself any longer. You deserve to slaughter their father, your own flesh and blood, in cold blood? Stay out of this, you cretinous relic, Jenna spat. I had bigger plans, grander wealth waiting on the horizon. Derek was a stepping stone I needed to discard like all the others before him. Besides, it's not like those boys brought anything positive to my life. A collective shudder reverberated around the room. Even Jenna's own attorneys averted their gazes, disgust etched on their craggy faces. Then I guess they dodged a pretty big bullet by winding up with their grandma instead of an egomaniacal sociopath like you, Mei Ling said, chin raised in defiant contempt. Lurching to her feet, Jenna unleashed the full force of her black rage. Nobody was supposed to dig this deep. How dare you interfere with my destiny? Those brats and their pitiful trust fund were just the tip of the iceberg. She wheeled toward me, eyes wild with madness. I hope you're prepared to suffer, Lorraine. Starting with watching your precious grandsons be stripped away once my associate's on the outside. The gavel cracked down as a hulking bailiff seized Jenna's flailing arms. That's enough, ma'am. You've already dug your grave deeper than hell itself. In the pandemonium, Annalise discreetly slid her hand over my clenched fist under the table. A small, grim smile tugged at her lips. We got her, she murmured, in front of the entire jury. Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering violations, criminal negligence toward minors. The rap sheet goes on and on. By the time we present our closing arguments, she'll be praying to go away for life instead of lethal injection. With dawning realization, I glanced around at the pale, stricken faces of the jurors, middle-class Americans much like myself, looking as if they'd witnessed the devil herself unleashed on their quiet hamlet. Not one semblance of sympathy remained for the raving, unhinged woman being restrained before us. In that surreal moment, the gravity of the victory sank in. My son's legacy had been preserved. My grandchildren had been pried from the clutches of a demonic succubus by the barest margins before it was too late. And the deranged charlatan who almost stole everything from me in her quest for wealth and power would finally be entombed where she belonged, in a cage. As Jenna's unhinged howls receded down the courthouse corridor, I felt the leaden weight of tension slough off my shoulders for the first time in over a year. An era of healing could finally commence. A heavy silence blanketed the courtroom as we reassembled the following day for closing arguments and sentencing. Jenna had been temporarily removed, giving the jurors some respite from her poisonous presence before delivering their verdict. But the tension was still palpable, a suffocating dread that the unthinkable could still transpire and that vile harpy might somehow slither away unscathed. Mei Ling squeezed my arm as we took our places at the prosecution's table. Just a little while longer. Stay strong. I managed a resolute nod, scanning the crowd until my gaze landed on Alex and Caleb, flanked by their court-appointed guardian. Their angelic faces were somber, almost sage-like in their premature hardening against the realities they'd been forced to endure. It fortified my resolve to see this malignancy eradicated from their lives once and for all. They deserved the world, warm homes, unconditional love, blissful days of chasing lightning bugs and jumping into leaf piles. Not this paradigm of toxicity and reckless self-interest. The courtroom fell into a hush as the bailiff escorted Jenna inside, her rail-thin wrists encased in shackles. Our eyes bored into one another, hazel meeting ice blue in a silent clash of wills. "State your final remarks," the judge intoned, his weary tone betraying the aftershocks of the evidence he'd presented over the last several days. Jenna rose on shaky legs, painted lips pursing into a defiant sneer. "I have no final remarks, aside from the fact that this biased, uncultured backwater of a town has no comprehension of the grandeur I was born to achieve." A disgusted titter rippled across the gallery. Jenna's gaze flickered around the room before landing squarely on me, that sneer metastasizing into a look of pure, undiluted hatred. "They're my sons. My flesh and blood, not this decrepit harpy's. Yet because of your deranged witch hunt, I've been robbed of my rightful legacy, all for the sake of two ungrateful little bastards who did nothing but hold me back." Her voice rose to a shrill screech, spittle flying. "They don't deserve my fortune or my empire. I hope they rot right alongside you for the rest of their pathetic—" "Miss Mitchell?" The judge's boom reverberated like a shotgun blast, startling Jenna into stunned silence. "I will have order in this court." He turned his withering glare toward the jurors, who flinched collectively. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, as well as the defendant's own admissions of guilt, any further grandstanding is unnecessary. Tugging on the hem of his robe, the judge exhaled a solemn sigh. "Jenna Mitchell, this court finds you guilty beyond all reasonable doubt on all counts, including first-degree murder, criminal conspiracy, child endangerment, money laundering, and racketeering. You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole." An anguished howl spilled from Jenna's twisted lips as the sentence hit home. "No, you can't do this to me. I was destined. I was meant for glory, for opulence." Two burly bailiffs gripped her flailing arms as she fought against their restraints with feral desperation. "Let me go. I won't rot in your cages, you pathetic scum. Alex, Caleb, you were supposed to be my legacy." Our eyes met one final time across the courtroom as she was hauled toward the doors. Ironic, the woman who had sacrificed her own children in pursuit of greatness was now little more than a rabid dog being carted away from polite society. As the doors clanged shut behind her, an eerie silence fell over the room like the aftershock of a bomb blast. We all remained motionless, struggling to process the finality of it. Then, a tiny sound pierced the hush, the muffled sniffle of a child crying. I whipped around to see Caleb burying his face in his guardian's shoulder, whole body shaking with sobs of bewildered relief and anguish. Alex's jaw was set in a rigid line, but crystalline tears streaked down his ashen cheeks. In that moment, my heart both swelled and shattered at once. No child should ever have to witness such depravity, least of all from the person who gave them life. But as I pulled them both into my embrace, permitting myself to finally unleash the torrent I'd pent up for far too long, I swore on my life it was the last trauma they would suffer. From here, Their worlds could only grow kinder and brighter. The spacious backyard was bathed in a warm summer glow as the evening shadows lengthened across the grass. Raucous laughter and the crack of baseball against aluminum echoed through the twilight air. "Heads up, Grandma!" I barely had time to glance over my shoulder before the battered softball whistled past my head, Caleb's voice ringing out in a peal of unbridled mirth. Clutching my chest in mock horror, I shook my head at the now 10-year-old cherub barreling toward me. "You rascal! Where did you learn to throw like that?" "From Alex," Caleb proclaimed proudly, puffing out his narrow chest. "He's teaching me all his pitches so I can make the all-star team next year like him." I ruffled his sandy curls, speckled with grass stains and sweat. "Is that so? Well, you two had better work up an appetite for those famous Mitchell family burgers I'm about to fire up." "Yes!" Caleb crowed, bounding across the yard to where Alex stood whipping pitches into an ancient catcher's mitt. At 12 years old, he was rapidly morphing into a young man, all knobby wrists and elbows jutting out at haphazard angles, yet the easygoing smile crinkling his eyes kept the last vestiges of boyish innocence intact. For now. As I busied myself stoking the grill, they resumed their impromptu batting practice, periodic whoops piercing the evening calm. Just a couple of rambunctious boys being boys, the way nature intended. Idly flipping the burgers, I couldn't help but gaze at them with a contented sense of pride and reverence. 2 years ago, they had arrived on my doorstep as skittish, traumatized waifs, their childhoods robbed from them by that soulless, vicious monster. But to see them now, shrieking and tussling on the grass with all the wild abandon of kids their age, it was nothing short of a miracle reborn from the ashes. "Grandma?" I glanced up to find them hovering at the edge of the concrete patio, grass stains crisscrossing their knees and T-shirts askew. Caleb fidgeted in that familiar way he did when broaching a sensitive topic. You don't have any other grandkids, do you? Just us?" My breath hitched slightly as I studied their earnest young faces. It was something I'd never pressed them on, not wanting to risk dredging up memories of that shattered former life. "No, honey," I replied gently. "Just my 2 favorite grandsons." Alex scuffed at the patio with his toe, jaw tightening the way it always did when wrestling with something monumental. "So you wouldn't mind if we didn't want to go by Mitchell anymore?" A pregnant pause stretched between us as my mind whirred, processing the weight of their request. Then Caleb barreled ahead in typical headlong fashion. "It's just, you're not like her, Grandma, and that name, it reminds us of all those bad, scary times we want to forget. We want your name instead, to match our real family." His imploring gaze shimmered with unshed tears, and I felt my throat constrict as the profundity of his plea washed over me. In that moment, I saw the depth of their courage shining through, 2 little warriors who had conquered more darkness than men 4 times their age. Clearing my throat, I turned to give Alex, my solemn, sensitive soul, an opportunity to voice what he'd clearly been mustering for a while. He held my gaze steadily. "Mitchell was never who we really were anyway. You're all we have, Grandma, and all we'll ever need." The words tumbled out in a childlike rush, but their impact was profound and eternal. A renewal of selfhood, an absolving of the shackles that had bound them to that venomous succubus's legacy. Crossing the patio in 2 strides, I enveloped them in my arms as my own tears finally spilled free. A kaleidoscope of memories ricocheted through me. Motherless childhood, dreams of raising kids in a loving home of my own one day, then the heartsick reality of being alone as an empty nester. Until these 2 battered little souls had resurrected my world from the ashes of despair. And now they were my entire universe. "Of course, my sweet boys," I whispered through the thickness gripping my throat. "From now on you'll have the family name you were always meant for. Sutherland. My Sutherland grandsons." Their answering embrace tightened with wordless emotion searing deeper than any dialect. A bygone open wound had finally mended into an unbreakable seal of wholeness. Jenna had gambled everything in pursuit of superficial glory, only to be banished into perpetual insignificance. But I, just an ordinary Midwestern widow, had reclaimed the greatest prize of all, a true, unshakable family, bound by the eternal ties of unconditional love.